All right. Welcome to a brand new episode of Seward Soundwords, taping here in Seward. Very happy to have Shannon Gramse here with us today. Shannon is a poet with a new book of poems out called Lost Last Poems by Cirque Press. He teaches writing at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I just this book really blew my mind. Poetry, this really shows what you can do with this form, and sky's the limit. I want to read a little bit from the annotator's forward. So right after the table of contents, readers get this. Once upon a time, a sophomore English major handed me a SanDisk USB drive after class. She had come upon it implausibly in the powder while snowboarding to Nana Peak and wanted to know my impressions of the interesting writing therein. Then, toward the end of this paragraph, late that night in my study, I clicked on the file Lost Last Poems and wandered wearily into an alphabetized wonder camera that now is implausibly you hold in your hand. So great little just kind of how this collection was housed. There's like story to it as well, and it really just fits as you get into reading these poems. A lot of great blurbs from some fantastic poets. The Tom Sexton one I think really captures this book. Of course, Tom Sexton, a big poet who is looked up to here in Alaska, who we unfortunately lost. He said about Shannon's book, no subject is beyond Gramsci's keen eye. From pre-contact Alaska to post-war Vietnam to everyday Alaska, all are held together by his sense of empathy. Be ready to work. Last two lines especially. And for Tom Sexton, that tells me like Tom had to work, so this is and I like to work, with language, with words, with the written form. So it was fun to go to work and just really get into something very original. I think as Shannon starts reading, you guys will get a sense of that. I just want to also mention this did with the Andy Hope Award, which is a prestigious award that Cirque gives out to one artist every year. I'll say a little bit more about that later because here I am just talking, and we got Shannon Gramse on the line, ready to read to you. So thank you so much, Shannon, for joining me today, and really happy to have you on the show.
Thanks, Sean. I'm happy to listen to you talk about how great I am. That's that's fun.
Yep, looking for that.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. When I first got that response from Tom Sexton and I had been friends for a long time. When I first got that, I was a little disappointed. I thought this isn't really going to sell books, right?
Yeah.
This is a difficult book to read, but the more I thought about it, I really was honored by that, and I think you're right. I think that's good advice going into that. I hope that people are willing to put in the work. That's something we really wonder about with contemporary poetry and with our culture, right? Where that kind of work is difficult, and I think a lot of people aren't willing to put that work in, or if they do, they feel like it's not rewarded. And so I took that as a powerful endorsement, and I hope I'm glad to hear that it worked for you.
For sure.
So I don't know where to begin. It's as Tom said, it's a complex book. I feel like it doesn't excerpt as well as it might. I honestly think of the book as one poem, kind of a mosaic
Yeah.
structure of a poem. And actually, that forward you talk about, as you say, is the first thing the reader encounters. I actually intend that to be a kind of a prose poem. Um, it's signed SG, and I guess that's me, but it really isn't me. I meant that to be kind of a pompous writing professor, and I don't know anybody like that. Uh, and I've heard different opinions about that. I'm nice to hear that you appreciate it. Some people really don't like that, and I think are a little offended. I'm making fun of writers
Yeah.
in that, and I thought, especially poets are so self-serious. I thought it would be fun to. I'm trying to be funny, and I think it's funny, um, in an era where writers are expected to promote themselves
Yeah.
all the time, and really, I think we can get kind of philosophical here as well. Probably people are more interested just to hear the stuff than hear me talk about it. But I think, um, it's not a radical idea that the speaker of a poem and the poet are different voices. I have to tell my students that all the time. They always forget that, oh, this Sharon Olds says this, blah, 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 but it necessarily isn't, right? And I think one way of thinking about poems is that they're all persona poems, and we're creating different, this is art here, it's not me. And I think we really, with such a focus on identity in writing these days, I think sometimes we lose sight of that's an old idea that goes back to the new critics in the mid 20th century, the idea that who knows what an author's intention is, maybe they don't know what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And who's to decide? And it's not up to the writer, it's up to the audience. And so I liked the way that besides being kind of funny, I thought it set it up, it challenged some of those identity based poetics that I think are so common right now.
Yeah.
And also sets it up as text, as a thing. I don't know if you know the old movie The Blair Witch Project. I thought it
Sure.
was such an inventive
Yeah.
horror movie. This is a found tapes, right? And this
Right,
is
right.
a purports to be, and of course it isn't. And some people really believed it was at the time. And
Right.
same with my sending this book around to early readers. Some readers said, I'm not comfortable with this. You found these.
Yeah, yeah.
And then no, 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 you got to read more creatively. If you're going to enjoy this book, you got to really read creatively and not just take everything I'm saying for gospel. The other piece, and I hope comes through in that book, is there's a kind of a journey about self toward a more Buddhist sensibility of non-self. And I hope that comes through in the book, and it contrasts with a kind of selfishness that results in domination and ecocide and all kind of problems. And so again, like working toward that sense of non-self, I think like the rest of the book philosophically fits with some of that. And again, is hard then in an era where it's all about being an impresario for yourself. How can you aspire to a sense of non-self when you're expected to always be promoting yourself and bragging about yourself? And so I was kind of wrapping all that up in I thought kind of an interesting way. And then of course the rest of the poem is, or the rest of the book is alphabetized by title. And again, I hope it seems to be prescribed and random perhaps, but it very much is not.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it sets up again the whole thing as kind of an artifact and a puzzle, if you will,
For sure. Yeah.
and begging people to maybe, if they and that's another thing with reading. I'll say another thing about reading. I typically I enjoy reading poems, and I think you're right, there's something to hear an author read their own work, but at the same time I wonder sometimes that reading something, especially modern poetry, you lose a lot. You're not able to see it. I spent at least as much time thinking about how these poems look on the page than how they sound.
Right.
And certainly the sound is really important, but modern poetry, since we've eschewed closed form for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
really it is also a visual art, a plastic art, and you lose that. The other piece to it goes back to Tom's comment then, and that hearing something just once while you're driving around Seward, right, in your truck, maybe you enjoy it, I hope, but I also hope I write the kind of work that invites and rewards rereading.
For
And
sure.
maybe the first time you read it, you say, well, I don't get that. That's weird. I don't understand that at all. But maybe if you go back to it, and I think those are the kind of poems I really admire, that they continue to yield something, energy or meaning or ideas over multiple encounters. But you don't really get that in this kind of format.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. That was all awesome. Thank you. I'm loving it. Yeah, like I'm on my second read through, and I love the first read, but now some of the surprise is gone, right? I've been through it. I know the subjects. I know what I'm being hit with a little bit. Almost like watching a great movie again. You kind of know a little more what to look for. I'm picking up more and kind of coming back to familiar things. Oh, I remember that one really spoke to me. And it is a lot of work, like Tom says, but I think with a poetry collection, you take them one at a time. You take a stanza at a time. Like you read one poem and, go start your day. I mean, that's plenty of, Gramsci for you for the day, So I like that word puzzle for this. I think that's definitely there. And then, that opening was funny to me. And I will mention Nancy Lord's wonderful review for the Anchorage Daily News, because she really hit on that annotators forward, spent some time on that. I think, you could tell she really just enjoyed that move, so you come at it with this game going on a bit, and then we'll talk about this. But there's the whole annotations bibliography, the wonder camera, a new word for me that's just really cool at the end, which is several pages. And I do want to hear about how that was put together, because that's a whole nother piece of this that I really enjoyed. I will say, because I don't think this has come through just yet, listeners will get a sense, but there's so much history and cultural history. That's why when I mentioned Borges was kind of like my one connection, because I did study him quite a bit, and I was
Yeah.
like, is he, these seem like real historical stories, like historical fiction going on. Is he, how much of this is he making up? How much of this is like part of a real cultural, story, myth, legend? And so that just drew me in so much. And this will become a theme because it is such a big theme, but this juxtaposition of Alaska Native culture and Vietnam culture, just often side by side, page to page, was just so cool. And, you're an expert on, I think, both, or certainly, very curious and interested in both. So just a really neat setup here for a person like you to put all this time into words about these very valuable things to certainly the people who own this culture. It's theirs, but also us who want to learn more. So that was such a big, and then I'm just kind of setting up my little, I guess, remembrance here, but like there is personal here, where I think, you're saying persona, but like there are moments where like, oh, like he's talking about his daughter, that's his family, which I really was drawn to. And those were some of my favorite poems. But I think those three things and that balance, how you kind of made that all fit into, as you say, one big poem was just so cool. So cool. And with all the hard, we've hit on like this is difficult work. There is definitely like breezy moments. You use a lot of lists where I can just really get comfortable and see what's in the trunk and just these cool items. And then just like, there's some one-liners and where I just get a line like, in Oh Canada, one of my favorite poems where you like weep a little bit with your like I just like, I'm about to weep a little bit. Like that just spoke to me so much. It's like, as a reader, you don't need to get the whole poem or break it up. What does it mean? Doesn't matter. Like you find one line that you connect to, like that's what you want, I think, as the creator of these in a way, right? Or you start there.
Yeah, thanks. That's well said. I'm really honored by the comparisons with Borges.
Oh
I
yeah.
really admire his work, and you're the first person to note that. They're playing around with reality and fantasy and counter
Yeah.
history and real history, and yeah, that's was very influential on my thinking on this. Yeah, and the notes section, that's part of what ultimately led to the decision to frame it this way in this kind of meta poetic false frame. Is I knew I needed to have some notes to explain some of the historical and cultural allusions in there and to give it kind of an academic. I talked to the designer. I was kind of wanted this to seem kind of somewhat dryly academic. Um, but then of course more than that. And yeah, and that's right. And again, I just got done saying the author's intentions don't matter. And it's
Yeah,
really
right.
up to the reader, but it's interesting to hear you talk about that, the juxtaposition of the colonial history in Alaska with the colonial and post-colonial situation in Vietnam, with the sense of family. That's sort of how I've thought about the three legs of the stool in this long poem, is as someone who's not Vietnamese and who's not Alaska Native, and as someone who teaches English in Alaska, but has spent a great deal of time trying to learn from these cultural intersections. It's a kind of a placemaking, I think, in this book, and trying to come to terms. I mean, I'm complicit. I was a little kid during the Vietnam War, but I'm a proud American. Um, and I, of course, wasn't here for the early stages of colonialism in Alaska, but I'm also, as I say, a non-native immigrant to Alaska who's spent a lot of time in rural Alaska teaching students every day here in Anchorage who are from across Alaska. And so trying to wrestle with that and figure out, well, how can I be a dad in
Yeah.
this context? How can I figure out a way to make this a home
Hmm.
on stolen land? And I've been so fortunate to spend time in Vietnam. I've spent about 2 of the last 6 years in Vietnam, and it's been an amazing chapter. Originally, I thought this book would be kind of a surrealist history of Alaska. But then adding in this amazing experiences, very surreal experiences I've had working as a professor in Vietnam, has really added a whole new way for me to understand my own culture and understand our history in Alaska, and trying to connect those things together. The front and the back, as Nancy Lord mentioned, the front and the back covers of the book, I think, are a clue to that. The front is a coal mine from the 1920s in Vietnam, and we need to really look closely at it to see the human scale. But on those shelves, there's a mountainside that's being carved away. Those are human beings, Vietnamese, working by hand, carving away the side of this mountain so the French can export coal. And the backside is one of the first oil drilling platforms in Alaska. And so, again, this is maybe too meta and boring to people. Sorry, but
Digging it. I'm digging it.
we know what happened in Vietnam as far as the American experience goes. And we've all grown up with that national scar, a really scar to the American pride and to the mythology of America, and a sense of shame and regret. We know that, right? We know that more than 50,000 Americans died there. We know that more than 3 million Vietnamese died there through our interactions with them. And there's a sense again of like, oh man, it could have been different, right? It shouldn't have been that way, for especially how it ended. And the suggestion in this book, I think, that I hope, my intention again is that unless we really think carefully about the sense of domination and hubris, and again, ecocide, I think there's an environmental angle to this book as well.
Yeah.
That some similar fate waits for us here in Alaska.
Yeah. History repeating itself. And
Yeah, right. And then there's this other strain of love and of trying to figure out how you can be a loving person in such a broken world, right? I think the book starts off on a note of cynicism about that, and I hope leads somewhere else. So I don't know. Maybe no one's willing to work that hard to find it. Maybe just me and you, Sean. But
no, I think of
kind of the overview.
yeah, yeah. I mean, writers certainly, poets, and I like, yeah, taking it one by one. I mean, there's people, any reader can come at this and come away with something powerful. I mean, there's powerful stuff in here. Like, you're not backing down. You face violence. You face, really tragic history stuff. So yeah, that cynicism goes away pretty quick. It gets heavy. But yeah, it's a ride.
You're a writer also.
Yeah, fiction. Doing a lot of comedy lately, which has been really fun. This day and age just kind of was time to go for it. Just
Yeah.
our local deal here, but it's really fun to write something, the week of and go do it, and exercise it, publish it and move on. And sometimes make people laugh is pretty, what better thing to try to work at. So that's been a good ride for almost a year now.
Definitely important.
Yep.
Well, should I read something? We could
Definitely.
just keep.
Yeah. No, let's hear some poems. This is Seward Soundwords on 91.7 KIBH FM Seward. We are here with a very special guest, Shannon Gramse, teacher of writing at University of Alaska and a poet of a new amazing poetry collection by Cirque Press called Lost Last Poems. And you're also taking this in most likely on our YouTube channel, which is at Sacktown.
As I say, it's in my mind, it sort of all runs together. It's hard to just grab something out of the stream. Do you have a request? Is something you'd like me to read?
I mean,
or I just pick randomly.
I mean, I could see, the poem that like where I locked in and was like, all right, because it's feeling very over my head, and I love reading, like I'm a Borges kind of
Yeah.
story, like all of that. I was like, I have no idea what that was, but I love it, so I'm fine. But where I really kind of locked really in, like, okay, this one I really got, and I want more of these, was the Loon poem, the Come On, Come On, which is page 17. So it's kind of right at a key mark, where like the deal with the readers, or like plot point, right, where the movie where it usually happens. I thought that just landed so well. And that one I was just with every step of the way. I'm very getting, I think you explained that so well, as white people who immigrated. I like that term for us, immigrated to Alaska, on stolen land here. And as writers, certainly, I think there's a responsibility to, teachers certainly to keep learning about Native culture. So I'm really picking that up and yeah. So this poem, yeah, maybe that one is that.
Yeah, sure. And this one is speaking of which is also I'm treading in really sensitive territory here in terms of appropriating other people's traditions. And part of this poem is informed by a real oral history from the Noatak area, which I talk about in the notes section. And we can that's probably a subject for a different show. We can talk about cultural appropriation and gatekeeping and these things. But I think that I'm trying, although this is delicate ground, I'm also trying to be as respectful and transparent as possible. It's another thing that I think that opening sets up in terms of scrambling the potential identity of this person and making us think about what is okay and what isn't okay, and pushing on that a little bit, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah.
So yeah, this poem, I'm interesting when you mentioned this poem is in 4 different parts. And as I say, the first part is derived from an actual Inupiaq story from Noatak, a place I've been several times.
Cool.
Come on, come on. Part 1. Carl Stalker used to tell a story about a blind boy from Noatak who liked walking along near the lake. He could barely use a stick, so well he knew the trail. One day he thought he heard a loon wail, "Come on, come on." He stopped. "Come on, come on." The loon sang again, closer, so the boy dropped his stick and grabbled his alder-tangled way to the shore. A loon swam to him and said, "If I could help you see, I would. Hold my back." The astonished boy stumbled slightly, stepping in the shallows, but then his hands found the loon's back, and they were below, diving down into the great weight and deep cold of the water. Just when the boy could hold his breath no more, they burst to the surface and to a lightness rising in his black, which the loon knew by the boy's face, and so plunged again suddenly into the cold weight. The boy could feel their fantastic speed and loops after loops, his legs curving behind. As they rose a second time, the boy gasped and the loon asked, "How are your eyes?" "Shapes, I see the shore," exclaimed the boy, who could hardly fill his lungs before the loon dove into what the boy now saw as aquamarine depths, wavering bloom of the sun. This dive was the deepest and longest and loopiest yet, and rising a third time, the loon looked back, but the boy's blurry eyes could not meet his gaze. When they'd gone under and come up 4 times, the boy was nearly drowned. Again, the loon asked, "How are your eyes?" Slowly, the boy's eyes opened upon the loon's black and white checkered back. Lifting his head, he coughed hard, met a god's blood-red eye, coughed again, and he could see green alders waving from the shore. He saw all the places he used to go, even the snow on the top of the Miarmuk Mountains. Then the boy and the loon laughed together a long time. Carl Stalker told it better and different, most certain. Part 2. Age across age, heavy-boned, first bird, prodigious diver in dentillium necklace, faster than fish, your lunatic music drew me long ago. My family and all the other kids and everyone I ever knew slept along the shore as I rose, tiptoed, slipped in, swam home. Part 3. Early, a warm wind broke up what remained of the ice, but for north-facing bays. They arrived the next day back to our, as we say, lake, back to their island cradle. Maybe the same pair as last summer's record heat and the summers of the fires, perhaps even our first family summer. Baby splashing at the swimming hole, younger wife holding her, younger me getting the shot, downy chicks trying to dive. They traveled separately, oddly, here to Baja and back, over subdivisions and malls, outwash pipes and stacks. They follow freeway lights by nights, marsh to marsh. Where marshes are no more, they keep moving or make do, maybe mistake a parking lot in the rain for a pond and perish. We heard their whale song first. When they swam up close, we froze in our plastic clothes, bowed like an old Asian couple, wished warbled absolution. Finally, part 4. A multitude to be devoured, entire planets, yet loons yodel and laugh through all night evening. My wife and my daughter read in the cabin loft. Neighbors toward town have stopped shooting. Brushstrokes stretch celestial wings on gilt waves. Spotted deer wander in and out of temple gates.
Awesome. Thank you. And that one, that's a nice kind of symbolic, I think, for the book. Right at the end there, that seems like a touch of Vietnam, right? With a deer going through the gates. We get the personal, and we certainly get the native culture early on.
Yeah.
And I'm a birder, I will say, so that kind of factored in. But that one has like that whole part 1, which was at least half of what you just read. Like that's
Right.
a story. That was almost just like really good children's literature. Like, okay, the boy's blind. This loon's gonna take him down. They talk. There's dialogue. Not hard for a reader. I was just lost in that. Going right along, holding your hand. Um, so
That's
yeah,
great. But
yeah,
like you say, it also introduces some themes, and we're in the C's now, and this book is alphabetized, so we're introducing some themes then that come come in later in the book. Yeah, well, that's cool. It's really interesting, as you know, we don't get a lot of feedback as
no,
writers.
right. That's
Same
why I
with
like.
same with being a teacher. You sort of have to have faith that
Yeah.
someone's listening and someone's gonna mean something to someone. And so it's interesting to have a conversation like this with someone who's read the book. And other than my friends and family, I don't get a lot of that. And so
Yeah.
it's rewarding to hear.
And people don't really tell you that. It's like I'm like thinking, oh, everyone who reads it's gonna just reach out and let me know, and I'm gonna have a list. It's like I wasn't ready for that, and it can be a little. But I think we keep in mind. Look, we wrote a book; it's forever. The point is for it to endure. It could be people, after we're long gone, who we connect to. You can always trust that. But you see now why I'm kind of liking the stand-up thing. Because even if no one
Yeah.
laughs, it's like, oh, that's a real feedback right there. Like I know, we're so in the dark, so that's been fun.
Yeah, exactly. You at least know who's listening in the room.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, should we read another one here?
For sure. Yeah. Keep it coming.
Let's see. That was kind of a long one, and there's a real variety in here. I tried to do a real variety of forms and styles.
Yeah, there is. Yep.
Um,
All kinds of stuff.
yeah. Um, Goodness gracious.
I mean, you got the haiku for Ho Chi Minh, that's quick. Gives
I
you.
just I just turned to that one. Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is one of the last poems I wrote for the book. It came in late, and it was again, the way I thought of this more like an album than single, right? Is like the kind of
Right.
single kind of work. And so late in the process, going through and looking for themes and looking for kind of gaps and
Mm-hmm.
places I want to introduce certain ideas, and also alphabetizing things. I wanted something here, and I wanted something in the H's. And so that kind of led from one thing led to another. Then I wanted to introduce some ideas about Vietnam here earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and be more clear. Ho Chi Minh is a very controversial figure to this day, depending on who you talk to. And it's very complicated.
Yeah.
So here's another case where I'm dabbling in someone else's story and trying to empathize and trying to understand that as a person with a real interest in this, a sincere interest. And because these ideas have really also influenced my life,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm trying to, in this poem, navigate some of that needle. I have a needle here. Yeah, Ho Chi Minh, depending on you talk to, is either a saint and the George Washington of modern Vietnam, or else a dehumanizing villain who was responsible for murdering many, many people. And it was very complicated. And I have
Wow.
friends in Vietnam who would
Both
fall on
sides.
both sides of
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So anyway, haiku for Ho Chi Minh. And Ho Chi Minh is from Nhan province. It's in north central Vietnam. I've been very fortunate in my life to visit Nhan province 3 times. It's a hotbed of revolutionary and nationalist activity. And Ho Chi Minh and a lot of other leaders fought against the French, and the Americans came out of Nhan province. I reference Nhan right in the opening line of this. So, and again, that's something why I needed more of those notes, I think, and I hope that adds another layer to the experience for people reading this.
Absolutely.
Even though some of what I say in this book isn't true, and we play around with that too, in a kind of Borges way, right? A kind of counter history. Some of it is and some of it isn't, and I'll leave you to decide.
Yeah, I got that
This is,
sense, which was a
yeah.
fun place to be, you know? Yeah.
Haiku for Ho Chi Minh. Dusk drops on Neon. Buffaloes and their plowmen stop to contemplate. Pink lotus blossoms, supernovae uprising, born of scum and mud. Rows of macarons, shackled hand and foot, shiver in the chilled glass case. Paper horses burn to hurdle warrior saints against fortress clouds. But peace won in war is only a cut lotus in an old cracked vase. A boy born broken to a bottle of orange rain still gropes for his eyes. Apotheosis. Plastic wears out long before sandals made from tires. Do you remember running with your dragon kite? How taut string cuts skin?
Nice.
Um,
Haikus there, and there's like a form that I think a lot of, maybe new poets, people who don't really write that much. Okay, I'm comfortable in this form. I've tried haiku. Let's see what Shannon's up to with this. I learned to get some bites of Vietnam.
yeah.
Question at the end. Yeah, I like that.
Um, maybe flipping ahead in the pages here and H, maybe how he drove them. That's a rhyming poem. There's several rhyme poems that have rhyme and meter in here,
Yeah.
but this is about Talkeetna,
Hmm.
called How He Drove Them. Summer extends to mid-September now, so under golden aspen crowns, Main Street Talkeetna remains as a fair, and ice cream crowds prowl from the Leaf Spring hunting knives tent to the candied cashews booth. A block north, the Talkeetna Historical Society Museum, the old school, sits lonesome as the great Susitna swamp that drains those mountains, where Don Sheldon built a cabin on God's hand and wielded his wolf guns, twin 12 gauges on springs under each Piper Cub wing, both sides sighted to X's etched on the windshield. He was a ball turret gunner turned pilot. Across from the museum, the historic freighter's cabin, it too deserted, belonged to a man who loved horses before the business of their burden. Though you know how he drove them, miles to the mines, fording rivers through mud and mosquitoes and deepest pits of cold. There is a picture of horses on snowshoes pulling sledges. Did it pain him to drive them? Back on Main Street, a woman in white holds a man's face in her palm. She speaks to him, turns him to see the quaint log shops and rustic blight. Denali is out, but the man's face can see nothing, a sort of heavenly light.
Nice. Yeah,
Um,
so you're in Ho Chi Minh, just the page before is where the haikus, and then
yeah,
now, I'm thinking, a lot of Alaska readers, right, is probably the most common reader. I'm not ruling out, Vietnam and worldly,
sure.
but then you get to go to Talkeetna, which a lot of us have been to. We're comfortable there. We've been on that street. We're like, oh, I know he's talking about Denali, so it's like you always kind of bring us back and keep some familiar going, the personal, like you've touched on a bit, but That's where I really kind of,
I like that idea of juxtaposition, of putting two things together and making sparks between them,
yeah,
especially when they don't necessarily go together at first.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big idea of this book. I mean, like, these are probably poems you accumulated between your interests, and I am curious about that. Like, I mean, we're just getting this book, which like the artist, you put so much work into this, and like here it is. It's this, it's medium-sized book, and we just get this treasure. Like, here you go. It's ready for you. But I imagine like these weren't all like, all right, I'm gonna write a book of poems, like 2 years ago, and you just sat and wrote them. Like these were accumulated over your life. Some you got more ready to write, felt like, okay, now I can write this one. I've learned more about that culture. It just keeps calling for me to write it. I'm going to try. So I would love to hear you at some point talk a little about like kind of the gathering of the poems and
Yeah.
over time, a little insight, of course, like with there's like mystery around this. And so share what you want to share. I think it's fun to not know too, but like having you here is, we can get led inside that process a little more.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been writing poems for a long time. These are all in the last, 10 years or so.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's not my full-time job, of course. I'm very much a Sunday writer, as
Oh,
they say
cool.
about Sunday painters. I mean, I teach writing and literature, and so I often find that that drains the same battery
Yeah.
at the end of the day after helping other people with their writing and talking about writing. And then often I don't have the energy to sit and do my own writing.
Yep. I
So
hear you.
as capacity allows, I've been working on these things for a long time, but I've always been a little bit ambivalent about publishing.
Okay. Yeah.
I have kind of a maybe sour attitude about that, but I think there's some philosophy behind it. I knew John Haynes back in
Yeah.
the day,
Cool.
um, and and one thing he said to me is he said, "Don't equate publication with success. It's pretty easy to someone will publish your work, but don't take that low hanging fruit. Like take your time and
Yeah.
really take the work seriously. He was of a different generation, and Tom, I think, maybe is one of the last of those. Really, and it's problematic in some ways. It tends to be a lot of white guys living in cabins,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But a different kind of poet who we looked to in a different way, and we expected something different than a sort of dime a dozen slam poetry kind of stuff. I mean, there's the different dignity and stature. Maybe it's just my imagination. I think it's a pre-internet thing,
Yeah.
honestly. In
Yeah.
some
That's what I'm
ways.
thinking of. Right.
I think it's
Yeah.
a pre-internet thing, and I think that again, there's a lot of privilege involved in that. John Haynes' father was an admiral, and he studied abstract art in New York City, and then moved up to Delta to do the kind of Chris McCandless thing way back in the 50s, right? Kind of
Yeah.
into the wild, and really melded this kind of modern artistic sensibility, actually very influenced by Asian poetry, with a kind of Alaskan frontier aesthetic. And yeah, he's a newcomer to that. There's a lot of things we can critique about that today. But anyway, I really learned from that idea and aspired to that,
Yeah.
where I wanted to take my time. Um, and so I actually wasn't going to publish this book. A friend of mine in Minnesota is a singer-songwriter. And so I kind of like you talk about doing comedy or something. He really said, I'd been sharing these things with him, over the years. And he said, you really have to get this out there. It said it's the same with being a songwriter or a comic. You need an audience. You need that piece of the equation. And so I kind of reluctantly did. I didn't shop it around at all. I just sent it to Alaska presses.
Yeah.
I wasn't, again, I'm not that interested in that game. We used to say in graduate school, the biz, like showbiz, right?
Oh,
Of
yeah.
like everyone's going to AWP and trying to sell themselves and prostitute this idea for
Yeah.
some little bit of fame that isn't really at all,
Right. Right.
A friend of mine who's a writer in Saigon, I think put it really well. American who lives there is a poet. He said, especially with poetry, the difference between a big national press, like Copper Canyon or Grey Wolf,
Yeah.
and a small regional press like Cirque is maybe a few hundred readers.
Right.
A book reviewed in the New York Times, published by Copper Canyon, is maybe going to sell 1,500 copies. My book might sell 800, you know? So like, why is this considered such an important piece? I think the art and the work that goes into it, that's the main piece to it. And you need somebody, you need to share. So anyway, a friend of mine talked me into doing this somewhat reluctantly. You'd asked if this is my first book, and
Yeah.
it's the first book in a way of all my own work, but for a long time, when I was younger, my wife and I edited a journal and then a book series called Ice Flow.
Oh, right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
and that was this was in the, again, sort of, we started it just pre-internet. I remember going to the Lusac library in like the late 90s and opening books and finding like addresses of universities around the world. It was a, and stuff like now that'd be the easiest thing ever. It'd be like a Facebook group. But what the journal did was publish poetry in its original language and an English translation side by side
Cool.
from around the circumpolar north,
Hmm.
from Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, Russia. We published a lot of indigenous authors as well, from Russia, from the Russian Far East, and from Canada, and from Alaska, and again, and always in the native language and an English translation, and in other colonial languages too.
Really
And
cool.
so we did that for like, oh gosh, 13 years. And then it became a book series with the University of Alaska Press.
Yep.
And so I was deep into that
Yep.
and working on a lot of the translations as well in a collaborative way. I didn't put my name on them, but was always editing work and
Yeah.
working with translators and this shaping things. And that really was very much my education as a poet. Um,
Cool.
Learning so much. This is the first time I like put out my own stuff, but I had a lot of experience as an editor and translator and publisher of poetry before that. And it's an idea I got from Ezra Pound.
Huh?
Ezra Pound's another very controversial figure, but he really advocated for young poets to, first off, instead of promoting themselves, to promote the work of others,
Yeah.
create that space. Imagine if all of the writers like us, right, like what you're doing, right,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
taking space out to create opportunities for other writers. If everyone was doing that, you know, we'd have a different scene. And the other piece Pound talked about a lot is the importance of translation,
Uh-huh.
really focusing on language and trying to recreate poems in English from other languages is an excellent practice as a poet. So that's kind of a, and I've been a professor at UAA for a long, long time, in part based on that earlier work. And so this was it's a little unusual, I guess, for a first book, you know, for somebody like me in my 50s. And another joke, the title is sort of a joke about that too. I think it's a funny title for a first book, right? Because it's definitely not lost. It's in your hands. And I hope it's not my last.
Right.
Maybe,
Good. Me neither. Yeah.
but
Lost last poems. Yeah.
maybe so. So anyway, that's maybe not as interesting as
No, that I mean, I could go on. I want to say a couple things if I may, as you've maybe
yeah, please.
that was so good. Yeah, I think, this is just shedding light on my life and my kind of maturation as an artist because, art it's art and the all the other things like putting together a book and promoting it and like the pressure of sharing it takes away from the energy of just the pure art. I have a friend, a painter who, stuff's amazing. And I'm always like, oh, let's like do a little show or show. He's like, yeah, and he's just like locked in right now doing a painting a day, just happy as he can be. And you don't want to mess that up. You're
Yeah,
writing poems every Sunday. I imagine Sundays are a pretty nice day where you can just kind of pour in and be an artist and get the words you need to down. You don't want to mess with that. And when projects come in, it's like, oh, well, like I tell people getting into writing, like, don't even think about sharing it. It's just like going for a run, doing yoga, doing something healthy that just feels good. The end all is just that half hour you spent doing that. Doesn't even matter what's on the page. And of course,
exactly.
you'll build. But I'm glad you did share, and you had to share. You were sharing with your friend, right? So that's one way.
Right.
That was your publication. Like, here you go. What do you think? And we know, I think, like I've been late to like going looking for feedback, but I wouldn't know in a lot of ways, like how am I meeting my kind of heroes? Am I progressing toward like, these things that I love and I've read like Borges and stuff, I'm on the path. Um, but how about just to like, to endure for even your family? Like it's so easy to just hand this off rather than the file, like, hey, here, this is done. This can go on the shelf. This is some hard work I did, and it's all collected. And I imagine it sounds like, with these poems taken separately, sure they're informing each other, but to put the book together is such an art itself that I imagine you enjoyed, rather than like writing new words, like, okay, how am I going to cobble this
Definitely.
up? Yeah, yeah,
And like the haiku, once you start to put things together, then other ideas, the whole then becomes informative to the parts,
for sure. Yeah,
for sure. And yeah, that's actually my favorite part of the process is I don't really I don't care about attention really, but when I knew the book was in the bag and I knew it was going to see the light of day, to mix metaphors,
yeah,
um, like much of last winter was fun to like tweak things and add things and change things and kind of really develop
yeah.
that whole sense. They say the art of revision is making it look like you knew what you were doing all along,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah,
And so it does come together randomly and in pieces, but then slowly you just any project, I say that to
yeah,
students all the time, you just keep chipping away on it, sleep on it, give it time, and you'll surprise yourself actually the way it finally comes together.
yeah. And if you don't make that decision to, I'm going to put out a book, you don't get to this new artistic step of putting together the book that you really enjoyed, and like, so
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
two
And then
things.
hearing from people like you is really inspiring, or Nancy Lords. Although again, I think that can be addictive, and
Right.
I think it can be toxic to the artistic process, as you were saying as well. You have to be really careful about that,
Yeah.
and not get chase that too much.
Yeah.
Really focus on the actual work and not. So many people would rather be a poet than write poetry, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
really work at it and not just take the path of least resistance, right? To really put that foremost, and as you say, maybe for yourself first, not
Yeah.
worry about other people, and then down the road with limited, I think, some limited expectations, like then it's good to hear from people then say, oh, I really like that, or I think about that.
Yeah. Well, and just think of the chances, your writing has inspired me in ways, and still will, and other writers who get this be like, wow, like that's a new thing that artist just did. Like, and that gives me an idea. Like if he did, how that works. Like you've been
Yeah,
inspired by big books. You mentioned some of your people important to you,
yeah,
Haynes and Pound, so
yeah.
Gramsci now can be for like a next generation. Who knows?
I don't know
I'm
about
really
that.
glad. I'm really glad you took the jump, and I just think it is so neat to get one of these. Like I'll use an Avid Brothers quote that I really like in a song. Making it to be a glorious debut. Like many years in the making to get such a scholarly and kind of a writer who's been kind of laying low. To come out with something, this wonder camera of words and feelings and just poetry. So.
Well, thanks a lot, Sean.
Yeah. 91.7 KIBH FM Seward and on YouTube on our at Sacktown channel. I'm your host, Sean Ulman, and Shannon Gramse is the guest today. He's got his new book, Lost Last Poems from Cirque Press. And I think he might read a couple more for us. Or how we doing, Shannon?
Yeah, whatever, we're doing okay for time.
Yeah, I'm good. Yep.
Maybe you mentioned "Oh Canada."
Yeah, love that one.
If I can read that without crying, I
Right.
could give it a try.
I've cried on the show. We've had that. So, you're in good territory. I'll show the readers what this one kind of looks like because this is another shape. It's just a full block of words there, as you can see.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, kind of prose poem, but also I really did a lot of I wanted people to see this as something made. I think that's a weakness with free verse. T.S. Eliot said something about that. In sexist language, we don't use anymore, but he said, no verse is free for the man who wants to do a good job. Right. And I think, free verse is wonderful, but also form has a very powerful creative role in poetry, I believe. And I think that's one of the things that attracted me to it from the beginning. Is I mentioned earlier that plastic sense, and plastic in the artistic use of the word, that these are shaped, there's a shape to these things, right? It's a physical thing. It's not just words, prose that just breaks wherever the paragraph lines break, right? And so this is a little bit of both. It reads like prose, but I'm glad you showed our audience the block on the page. I do quite a bit of that in the book. Anyway, oh Canada. When I drop my fourth grade daughter off at school, I walk her to her classroom, these days more for my sake than hers. These days, students' parents are only allowed free passage to the fortress for a brief window before the bell, before the timed locks, surveillance cameras, asked to be buzzed in and get your orange visitor pass protocol kicks in. Her class is to be Canada in the school Olympics, and she stayed up too late last night making red and white paper flags, each with a red maple leaf and stripes cut and pasted on a piece of white paper taped to a soda straw. She made 24 and now struggles to carry her flags with her purple lunchbox and her silver shoes. She keeps dropping her shoes, so I offer to carry them for her. When we reach room 104, her classmates scream and drop their heavy coats and snow boots and surround her as she starts handing out flags, first to her teacher, then to the boy I know she rather likes, then to all the kids. She beams as everyone waves their maple leafs, and I can see she knows she belongs, knows she is loved. So I weep a bit, like I often do. I wave goodbye and leave as usual through the kindergarten wing. Unaccompanied, I am watched all the more closely by the teachers and aides as I try to exude absolute non-aggression. And as usual, I go back to Sandy Hook. Always Sandy Hook. To 20 kids huddled in the thunder and flash of the rounds, looks on their faces like Ivan Karamazov kids, starved, beaten, impaled, running naked before the master's hunting dogs, locked alone in the freezing outhouse all night, crying, face and mouth filled with filth, like hollow Holocaust kids, bombed out kids, chips for breakfast kids right here this morning. They have made amazing Matisse Muppets. They have made amazing Matisse Meets the Muppets cutouts of Martin Luther King and scrawled their puny dreams on his chest. No war, no mad, no guns. Back out in the cold, I look for the moon in vain as I walk to the car. And only when I reach for my keys do I realize I am still carrying a pair of silver shoes. Too big for a girl, somehow, too small for a woman. The locks are about to turn, so I sprint and then walk with perfect bodhisattva peace as I near the doors, hold up her silver shoes with a meek smile, and stroll past 20 Martin Luther Kings to room 104, where everyone is still waving flags around my shoeless, laughing girl. Oh, Canada, oh, my love, devils have taken the garden. Shadows leap and writhe amid their fires. But behind locked doors, we somehow still might play pretend and sing and find a way.
Bravo, man. I have our daughters in fourth grade, so this one, I mean, for parents, right? This is such a parent poem. And this is a story, another story where we're in scene. You even set up a very, kind of story thing where she keeps dropping her shoes. So you're holding them early on in this piece. And then at the end, that comes back around. I mean, the chips for breakfast kids, man. Shannon, like big stuff. Too big for a girl, too small for a woman. Just big lines. Yeah. Thank you for reading that.
Sure. Maybe a Vietnam poem?
Yeah.
About contemporary Vietnam. As I say, it's been one of the great joys of my life, an unexpected joy to make Vietnam a kind of a second home.
Yeah.
I moved to Alaska in 1996, and I just thought it was the greatest place ever. An end of story, right? But it's been an amazing journey for my family and I to get to know Vietnam over the years. We went there as professors. My wife had a sabbatical there training English teachers in 2019, 2020, and have gone back now. And I'm going back for my 8th time here in a few weeks. And so it's been really an amazing journey. We talked about form. Maybe I'll read this one. I haven't read this one aloud, I think, ever, but it's called The Rise of Saigon.
I'm sitting on that one right now.
Yeah, page 73. And this one is a concrete poem. A concrete poem is a poem that takes a certain form that looks like something. And this poem is meant to duplicate a very famous building in Saigon. And people have seen the photograph. during the fall of Saigon is one of the last helicopters taking off from a roof of a building.
Mm.
And this photograph is in the book, actually. It's in the notes section, a very famous photograph from 1975. And this poem is in the shape of that building that you see in that photograph. There you see, yeah, there's the helicopter taking off. It's an elevator building on top of the building. Yeah, yep. And so that's a example. I think of it as a example of a concrete poem. We're playing around with form. I even have the little ladder there.
Yeah.
And also my daughter is a character in this as well. Okay, the rise of Saigon, and it's a pun on the fall of Saigon. That's the name of that photograph. The fall of Saigon is
Okay.
the Americans were getting out as fast as possible as the city was about to fall to the communists, the Americans that were left. The rise of Saigon. The photograph, of the last Huey touching down on the rooftop as an army of ants clambers up the ladder to the bosom of Uncle Sam depicts not the US Embassy, but apartments operated by the CIA. Home to patriots and traitors, same. Address 22 Yalong. An Emperor Street today named for a boy, 22 Li Chu Chong. Brave Trong, 17, shot at French police and stood calmly for his execution. Ants on the ladder include South Vietnam's Minister of Defense, his cook, Vu the tailor who made civvies for the soldiers, his wife and 4 children, a few interpreters, clerks, neighbor kids with notes pinned to their chests. He studied doctor, she good music, and please. The jammed bird rises and turns toward Texas and California, toward a foot in a bulletproof door, portal to late night Addams Family elocution, nail tech tips, and forgetting. A century earlier, 2.5 blocks northeast of 22 Yalong, moonlit, the Governor General paced Palace Gardens alone, insomniac, still too hot after midnight. Peacocks and peahens stirred in clutches along the hedges. Cicadas screamed dementedly from the crowns of phantasmagoric trees. He had always known that some tribes, despite riches and every invitation, cannot be reborn as French. Councils and ministries, schools and hospitals, fine wines, evening promenade on Rue Catanat, opera house to cathedral, flinch behind barricades and battalions of heavy hands. The jungle insists. Thus, God love us, we break and yoke it to strip, pick, and load the ships. Over throbs of traffic, Vietnam's #1 mall now towers above 22 Li Chu Trong. Banks of Escher-esque escalators convey proletariat VIPs, an uptown tribe, polite, posh, delightedly unarmed and cool in perfumed muzak, in mirrors mirrored, Louis Vuitton, Lacoste, Chanel. The Governor General would die. But I might pin a note to my girl and wave her up such a civilized escalator. The day we had to leave Saigon, I pointed to the empty ladder on the roof at 22 Li Chu Chong, silhouette of rails and rungs still rising into grayscale sky.
Nice.
That's true, actually. That ladder was still there in 2020. Now it's a bar. It's now the top of that building has been converted to a bar called the Last Mission, but that's actually true. That ladder was still leaned up against that elevator housing.
Wow.
In
Yeah, it was
yeah,
pretty cold. Yeah, now as I look at that photo, I see people, it's all up it going to the elevator.
exactly. Yeah, trying to get the hell out
Yeah.
because they knew that their lives were about to change and very much for the worst. Many of the people most involved with the South Vietnamese government faced a pretty hard time once the communists took over.
Plus, those are Vietnamese people trying to leave. Gotcha.
Yep, they had been American collaborators. Yep,
Okay.
they had folks who had been helping the Americans. Yeah, trying to get out. Maybe Alaska, or I don't know. How are we doing on time? We're running up short on time here.
I mean, I think we're close. We're about around an hour.
Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe that's enough. Um, what do you think,
However you're
Sean?
feeling. I mean, we could maybe do one more.
Okay.
I have a little, well, I don't nature calling for me, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
I do want to mention you don't need to read this one, but yesterday this one just whammed me was last day on Kon. Just
Yeah.
that ending. I mean, I think that's I think all throughout you hit this kind of your position, right? That you've mentioned as kind of a visitor and someone who's this isn't your culture, although you're as such a student, but I just wanted to let you know I love that poem, and it was powerful.
Thanks.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I like that one. That's another story. And again, that one looks kind of random, but I think it's 8 sections of 8 lines all blocked out. It's all
And like
it's all pretty intentional.
and with that one, maybe we could just touch on, because you mentioned this kind of hero young girl who,
Yeah.
like that's true history, right? Like, you talked about this counter history, like so like 'cause that's kind of
Yeah.
like here's her.
Booty Sao. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the only photographs known of her. That's a police photograph. Yeah, she was a young girl. Some people would call her a terrorist, some people would call her a patriot, but she attacked French troops with hand grenades,
Yep.
and the French executed her when she was barely 19. And should I just read the poem?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, now that we're
If
into
we have time?
yeah, oh for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm
Okay.
through the wave.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on the limitations here. Last day on Conson. Yeah, Conson was a famous prison island. The French opened it as a prison island in the 19th century, and then the Americans took over. When the Americans took over, basically for the French, their role in Southeast Asia. Maybe some listeners have heard of the famous tiger cages that were discovered in the early 70s by a congressional delegation. That was on Conson.
Okay.
Uh, they weren't supposed to see that. So some congressmen were visiting this prison and they went to an area they weren't supposed to see and saw some of the awful conditions
Okay.
of the prisoners. Many, many, many thousands of political prisoners died on this island, which now, as I mentioned in the poem, is being redeveloped as a kind of tropical tourism destination. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, but with a really sad history.
Wow.
And I talk about this young woman at the end of the poem, Bui Thi Sao, who's pictured in the back. She's a national hero in Vietnam for her courage. Last day on Con Son. Macaques peeled off into jungle from the upper temple steps as we approached. A few clutched smashed oranges or dragon fruit in their long hands as they ran, pilfered luck from a morning altar. A baby bestrode her mother's back, watching my friend from America and me as they metamorphosed to shadows and clatter. Above a tiled landing lined in bonsai and benches, Cloud Mountain Temple rose. Prayer flags striped blue, yellow, red, white, orange spoked across the courtyard. A bright marble bodhisattva of compassion, draped with flowers, raised her hand. Far below, lapis seas lapped beaches from crumbling prisons to half-done hotels. Birds flitted beneath the bowtie. Banks of plumeria enchanted my American friend. I stood watching carved clouds painted gold lift the swirled up corners of the eaves when a thin young man appeared, pressed check shirt, gold watch like a sun. Hello, would you like me to show you the pagoda? I pray here on my day off. I am police. Do you think policemen do not pray same, same? He said in clear English, smiling. I know they pray same, same, I answered. My father was a policeman in America. Very brave. Did your father have many gunfights with gangsters? Asked the man. No, not really. He helped people every day, I said. The young policeman nodded. Prison workers and their families first made this pagoda, he said as we stepped from our shoes past demon sentinels into the shade of a heavy timbered shrine. Pyramids of Coke cans and pomelos were arrayed before Buddhas of many sizes, with rows of long bearded scholars and kings in attendance, enameled or gold, eyes all closed, the slightest of smiles. Marigolds burst from white and blue vases, wrapped in dragons, twining together through clouds and flame over an angry sea. Electric lotuses, small lamps burning red oil, mote galaxies in sun slats lit the altar. The policemen bowed. Incense curled air. Someone somewhere started chanting. He showed us outside to a structure like an ornate grill where people burn prayers and imitation money for the dead. I said something about how I would like to know I would be so remembered. We walked through a pavilion built over a bronze bell with more dragons, swinging log to ring it, and then the house of a great red drum. Everywhere were benches, potted plants. A dust-colored dog lay in spider lily shade. We followed our guide into a second sanctuary, similar to the first, but for a monk writing at a table off to the side. His head, his shaved head shadowed gray over coral robes. He was as young as the policeman, gesturing an invitation for us to sit at the table. The monk closed his eyes, bowed, prayed, blessed each of us with a whisk of water. Next, he fanned an enormous deck of cards, a la Las Vegas, and turned to my friend. Choose, whispered the policeman. He chose. The monk sang his card's small song. The policeman translated. Let go the past. Let go your life. Be born each day anew. I could see this struck my American friend. Hearing my card, the policeman smiled. Do not worry. Everything is prepared for you, same as your father and his father. A rope around me uncinched. The monk handed us bracelets of bright black beads. As we bowed out the door, clouds and green mountains rose over red tiled roofs. You know, monks write the cards carefully to fit any person, said the policeman. He asked us to sit at a table under a tent and produce mugs of watery iced tea. He said he knew we didn't have licenses for our rented motorcycles, but it was okay as long as we wore our helmets and didn't ride drunk. Alcohol is most of my work. He asked us about freedom and seemed only slightly surprised as we described our misery, the tyranny of a people locked inside themselves, coming to a boil. The policeman nodded, adding that he nonetheless would like to see such a land. Then he said he would show us the way to the cemetery behind the old prisons. The policeman said goodbye at the cemetery gates, though by then I had hope against reason he would spend his whole day off with us two foreign strangers. Gates grew near the old French and American prisons like tailings from a mine. 17 mass graves, thousands of small single columns, mere hundreds with names. Sea breezes sighed in evergreen shade. Women in conical hats raked dry grass. My friend and I walked toward a towering central column topped in red stone. At its base was a porcupine of incense sticks and many paper gifts for the dead. Paper sunglasses, jewelry, gold bars, paper Louis Vuitton wallets, paper AK-47. In zone B2, we found the grave of Vuiti Sao, the schoolgirl who loved her family so much she rolled a hand grenade under soldiers' boots at a Bastille Day speech when she was 14, and another under an officer's table set with wine and cheese. She refused baptism and blindfold, would not stop singing before her firing squad. Shelves had been built around her grave to hold the steady flow of combs, mirrors, white flowers of all kinds, paper purses with paper lipstick, and a pretty paper brush. Sun-lashed sky. Our teenage daughters back home were dancing for their phones. My American friend and I stood silent a while, bowed, got the shot, hit the beach.
Yeah, that last graph in the whole build, but our teenage daughters back home were dancing for their phones. I mean, what a just American, a line these days of this age, right? And then this comparison. And
Yeah,
hearing how, you give that history or now modern, transition of this from this prison island to a destination, it's almost like you're alluding to that, with you and your friend there at the end, like, okay, we got it. Let's go hit the beach. Let's go back to our vacation. Like you guys can just walk away. Um,
exactly.
yeah. And with the policeman, like these stories, it's striking as we kind of talk and hear more. There's just so many stories here, where you're doing storytelling sentences, and I think at the end we see the series, the list sentences that I've alluded to, how those just
Yeah.
work so well, and they provide on their own. These items have nice language to them, right? The paper purses with paper lipstick and a pretty paper brush, paper three times, just so nice there. I
Yeah.
really, those lists were always like comfortable and just like you can kind of relax as a reader a little bit and just see what's yeah. But thanks for reading.
And I hope that, like you say, I hope that's clear enough. It's just a story, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you can take it at that and call it good, and don't
Yeah.
need to worry about symbolism or illusions or its connections to other things. So I hope there's multiple levels
Yeah,
working.
those aren't hard to me. You're dealing
Yeah,
with some hard material as far as like that's
right.
heavy, of course, with this girl. But I don't think Sexton would have thought those were hard. And I mean, such a cool insight. Like we get to go to Vietnam a little bit with you there and get this little walk around and be like, oh, this is cool. I've never been here. This is, kind of what it's like in a way. You get this little glimpse. So I really enjoyed that.
It's an amazing place, and I think that
Yeah.
the layers and layers of history that go back thousands of years there, I think is part of an inspiration for the layers in this book.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, someone tells me you'll stay at, the curiosity and study of Vietnam cultures. That's forever for you. That's endless as far as yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really encourage people to visit there if they get a chance. It's an amazing place.
Yeah. We got a list going, but I will. Yeah. It's really cool to hear. And you're going soon. So that's
Yeah, I'm going in December and January. I'm going to take a little longer winter break, and I'm going to be teaching at a university in Hanoi,
uh-huh.
and also teaching at a university in Nha Trang. Really interesting development. This just happened. I'm currently teaching a class in Vietnamese history. We have a thing in Anchorage called OLE. It stands for Opportunities for Lifelong Education. So these are non-credit classes for the community, just for fun, and
Cool.
tends to be older people. They're amazing students.
Yeah.
And I taught a long series for them about Russian literature. But the last couple of semesters, I've done courses in Vietnam. In the spring was the 50th anniversary of what the Vietnamese call reunification, the end of the war in 1975.
Oh,
So I
okay.
thought it'd be fun to do a course last spring about 50 years since the war. A lot of Americans' knowledge of Vietnam ends in the 70s and sort of what's been going on there. And
Yeah.
now this semester, I'm doing a course on early 20th century Vietnam, really the roots of the revolution that led to the American involvement. Well, anyway, long story short, I mentioned that to a friend of mine who's a dean at a university in Nha Trang, which is kind of like the Miami of Vietnam. It's a coastal
Okay.
community. The university has a focus on the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, fisheries and such. And he invited me to come teach this class in Vietnamese history at his university. And I thought it was strange because, like, a high school kid in Vietnam knows more about this
Right.
history than these are like the founding fathers of Vietnam, right? And knows more than I do. And he said, no, 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 you'll be teaching to foreign students. They have a group of
Oh,
foreign students studying at this university. And so he wants me to teach in English this very important history of Vietnam. And so I thought that sounds interesting
yeah.
to, to go teach Vietnamese history in Vietnam to a group of foreign exchange students who are not from Vietnam.
Really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to be going back there for a few weeks in December and January. It's really become amazing. I'm trying to learn Vietnamese. I've been practicing every day for about 5 years and maybe speak like a 3-year-old, maybe on a good.
The hard one.
Yeah, but so it's someone who likes to learn and explore things. It's an amazing place. I think my next book will probably next book of poetry. I'll focus on Vietnam is sort of my thought right now. That kind of intruded on this book that was going to be about Alaska and ended up being something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think they came together, really,
And as
really.
much as I try to make it not about me, I mean, anybody who knows me, this book is really just a journal of what's been on my mind for the last 10 years, really,
Yeah.
and that anybody like you who doesn't know me would be interested in reading such a journal is really a privilege and an honor. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, well, you found these poems, I imagine, while you're in Vietnam, like, oh, there's a little something. You make a note in your journal right then, and then you go back, like, that's something to stay with on my
Yeah.
Sundays back in snowy Anchorage. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And the same for you, these ideas, then they don't leave you alone. I just
Right.
assume not write. Actually, there'd be a lot better things to do with my time. I love to ski and I love
Yeah, yeah.
outdoors and things, but then it won't leave you alone.
Right.
Thinking about that experience with my friend at Vuiti Sau's grave, then it's like it demands your attention.
Yeah.
They just, yeah, you have to honor that and listen to those little voices sometimes.
There's a calling. Yep. And then you've done it, and that's a nice feeling where now that calling is kind of quieted and it's done, and you can be open for the next ones. It's
And
just
then you come to understand it in a new way
for
by
sure spending
making
the
art
time with
about
it,
it.
trying to communicate it to others, and yeah, it becomes bigger and just, yeah, more interesting.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sean.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure. You say, like, you alluded to me, putting my time in to do this and put others in the spotlight stuff, but like this is so enriching to me, to have these conversations. So it's not just like, oh, Sean's this guy, he's helping so much. It's like I want this from this enriches my life. I want this for my literary life too. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and really wonderful to meet you. Ideally be in
Yeah.
person. I look forward to spending time with you in person when you're back and down in Seward.
Yeah.
Definitely get in
I'm
touch.
sorry. I'm sorry I
Coffee.
couldn't make it to Seward at this freezing rain. I
No, this
love
was great.
Seward.
Yeah.
So I was there in July for a few days. Really love Seward. So I hope we get to meet there someday.
Yeah, we'll do it. Thank you so much, Shannon. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Sean.
Yeah. This has been Seward Soundwords episode on 91.7 KIBH FM Seward and on our YouTube channel at Sacktown. Thank you so much for listening.